a world where Threads is trying to take on Twitter, or shall I say X, more about that in the second half of the show, and where AI is the real buzzword. When all of these emerging technologies and trends are so prevalent around the world, there's a lot of questions before we get answers, especially about AI and what social media apps are doing, what kind of content moderation is needed, what kind of regulation is needed, taming the monster, the genie's out of the bottle, how do you put it back in there with the right safeguards? Well, Business Today likes to cover all the top stories and brings you those exclusive conversations here on Business Today and Tech Today. And Business Today's Rahul Kaval caught up with Meta's Nick Clegg and spoke to him on his India visit exclusively about all of these things and a lot more. Have a look.
I want to start by talking to you, Nick Clegg, about artificial intelligence and the manner in which it is capturing global imagination. And the biggest question of them all, who should regulate artificial intelligence? At Meta, sitting where you are in your global perch, how are you looking at this key question?
The first thing to say is AI is not new. It's been around for decades. There's a lot of hype at the moment around something called generative AI.
Sure.
Do you remember when ChatGPT burst onto the scene and you can ask it to write your school history essay or your wedding speech and it produces this beautiful text? And that, of course, has captured imagination. But I think it's somewhat obscured the reality that AI has been around for years. I mean, at Meta, for instance, we've been using AI for ages. Anything you see on Facebook or Instagram has in one way or another been touched by AI already. I think how to regulate them is a question of first working out what harms and problems you're trying to deal with. Is it intellectual property and copyright? Is it misinformation? And then ask yourself whether the current laws we have on the statute book are sufficient or not. And I suspect it'll be a mixture of the two. Some of the existing laws we have will be able to be applied to AI, and some new laws will be required. I hope, this is my hope, that as those new laws develop, they're developed as internationally as possible. Because this technology, it's very important to remember, this technology is bigger than any country, bigger than any company, so it needs to be dealt with together.
But when it comes to international regulation, different countries seem to be proceeding at different speeds.
Yeah.
In Europe, we're already seeing a far more robust regulatory framework than there is in the United States and even in India. And therefore, in India, we're still debating the privacy bill, which comes up in the monsoon session if the opposition were to allow it. And there is already an urgent need to be regulating AI. So what you're saying in principle sounds correct, but in reality, how do you see that being implemented?
I think there is as much a danger, interestingly enough, in rushing to regulate something that maybe hasn't been sort of properly analysed yet than there is about being too slow. So being too fast can also create problems because it means that you suffocate a lot of the innovation that will come from AI, or that at least would be the risk, which would be a great shame particularly for countries like India. I mean, India, it's not a question of if, it is a question of when India becomes one of the great digital superpowers of the world. It already has the world's second largest community of developers, and there are fantastic innovators, entrepreneurs, developers in India who are using AI today. And I think that culture of innovation, which is so strong in India, for which India is sort of globally famous, is something you don't want to sort of stymie by rushing to pass laws when it's not always obvious that new laws are necessarily the answer. I do think new laws will be necessary, but I think it's no bad thing to take a little bit of time to get it right.
From artificial intelligence, for a moment, I want to shift attention to Threads, which has gathered so much chatter over the past few days after its launch. And the question that while it launched with a lot of hype, user engagement and daily active users now seems to have come down quite a bit from the initial numbers. How are you seeing the manner in which Threads is playing itself out? What's the user case? What does it do different, which makes me, for example, want to move away from Twitter and come to Threads?
So look, I mean, firstly, when you get new apps, you always get this. There's a sort of eruption of interest. Lots of people kind of try use it 2 or 3 times, and then it falls off a bit as the people who are not going to be regular users kind of move on, and then you kind of get a core base of users, and then you build from that. And we've done that before, multiple times on Instagram, on Facebook with new features. And remember, Threads is how can I put it? It's a sort of work in progress. There are lots of new features which haven't been built yet, which we'll introduce over time. So that's not. I mean, that in a sense, we've done that before. We'll do it again. You get these kind of curves in the graph, if I can put it like that. But why do Threads? Well, because I think there are just a lot of people who are looking for a micro-blogging site where they can share news and views and kind of debate with people about stuff, whether it's about fashion or whether it's about sport, particularly when it's led by people you admire, creators, influencers, and so on, who don't necessarily find Twitter particularly attractive right now and want something which is a slightly kinder alternative, if I can put it like that. Sorry, it's not called Twitter anymore; it's called X, isn't it? So there's always there's space for more than one of those kind of micro-blogging sites. The interesting thing about Threads is we're building it very, very differently to things like Twitter. We're actually building it so that it will become part of something called the Fediverse, where you will be able to interoperably share your content on Mastodon, for instance. So it'll be a much more open platform where people will be able to share content across different sites. So it's not a sort of closed, walled garden. And we think that's going to be really interesting to see how that develops over time.
Because of the manner in which the data privacy around Facebook played itself out, for a while Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg became the bad boys of big tech. In the manner in which Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, turned it into X, do you think Elon Musk's actions make all of you at Meta look far more statesman-like, far more reasonable? In some ways, he's giving Meta and your company a new lease of life by making Meta cool again.
We don't spend too much of our time kind of looking over our shoulders at what other people are doing. What Elon Musk does is he's clearly a strong-willed character who's used to getting his own way. Is up to him. We focus on what we think is good for the billions of people who use our apps. The wonderful thing is that more and more human beings around the planet are using our apps. I keep reading in the papers, Facebook is something of the past. In fact, more human beings now use Facebook today than ever before. And you look at particularly the initial popularity of Threads, there's a real appetite for people to try out new ways of communicating with each other, reaching out to friends and family, debating things that they care about. And look, whether it's on building the new computing platform, so that we're building the kind of hardware, so that you can, instead of actually having to be with each other here physically as we are, if in the future
we could do it on the metaverse.
Yeah, in the future, you and I could walk in a virtual path. And by the way, because it already works like that, that the sound technology is so good, you really do think you're breathing the kind of same air, even if you might be thousands of miles apart. Whether it's that, whether it's Threads, whether it's all the innovations on Facebook, whether it's all the kind of fun and delight on Instagram, we will continue to innovate to appeal to something which is very visceral to all of us, which is how to communicate as human beings.
On a lighter note, about that cage match, as somebody looking at it, what's your wager? Is that a metaphor?
Oh my gosh, I've only got one answer if it happens. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg will win, and he's super fit, and he's really into fitness. He's really into these sports, into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and MMA, and so yeah. But listen, I think I don't know. I don't do it myself, but I think a lot of this is about technique, not just about size. Whether it'll actually happen or not, I honestly don't know.